Welcome to the second part of our video on creating and formatting charts here in Excel 2013. We're going to focus on the second tab of this file here, which is the worksheet called Cars. If you haven't done so already, you can download this file at strv.ms/1blv1 capital P capital T. So I'm going to click on the second worksheet here. And notice these most expensive cars in 2014. We have a Lamborghini, a Bugatti, and all these other wonderful nice cars. And no, it's not $4.50. I wish. For a mere $4.5 million, you can own a very expensive car. In fact, for a mere $12 million, you can own all these top 10 cars. So our challenge for this graph is to create a 2D column chart. So let's begin by highlighting this information. I'm not going to bother highlighting the total because that's irrelevant for my particular chart. And to create a graph, we are going to go to Insert, and you can see that there's this nice column chart which is very popular. And there's even this button that's called Recommended Charts, and it usually gives you a good idea of which ones that they recommend, and Excel is pretty smart in doing so. But right now we know that we want a column chart, so I'm just gonna click on this one here. Be careful not to accidentally click on these spark lines here, which is slightly to the right. That's something a bit different. So let's click on this column chart. I'm just gonna choose this basic column chart over here, 2D column chart, not the 3D ones, but the 2D ones. And there we go, we have it. We have these beautiful cars, each getting cheaper and cheaper, and you can see this is the cost in millions. Now let's see what happens when we switch the rows and columns. With this chart selected, I'm going to go to the ribbon here. You can see that we're automatically in the Chart Tools Design tab. There's this button called Switch Row and Column. So let's click on it and see what happens. So you can see that the bars, the values still go from higher to lower. So this general shape is retained. However, we lose all these informations on the side over here, which the individual names of the cars. So if you don't like this view of what you see right here, you can always switch it back to the way it was by clicking on this button again. So this is one view and this is another view. And these colors are pretty nice, but remember that when we have this particular view, you can always click on the bars and change the color. So for example, if I click on this chart here and you click on this Chart Styles button, there's wonderful styling options available here. So I can make it quite subtle or quite dramatic. And I can even click on this bar here, and you can see by default everything is selected, all these different bars. We can click on the color option here and you can change it to red, for example. We can individually click on a bar here, so that's the second time we click on it. You can see that these 4 circles focus on this particular bar, and we can change. If I double click it, I can focus on this one only by going to the fill and line option and change the color to something else, such as blue. And there's so many other options you can play with, but it's a bit overkill to go through everything. So great job. We know about this column chart because it's very famous and popular. People tend to understand the meaning of these column charts used to compare various categories in terms of how big or small they are. And now we're also aware of, once you click on a graph, the ability to switch row and column. Let's click on the car sales worksheet now. So imagine that we were car salespeople and that we worked for the month of January and February, and we were superstars. We sold 12 of these very expensive cars in January. Lamborghinis, and in February 15. In fact, we sold all these other cars. We sold so many cars in January as well as in February. And here is the graph to show this performance for each different type of car. Now, unfortunately, this graph only shows our performance for January. So our challenge is to include our performance for February and then be able to compare January's performance with February's sales. So how can we do that? Let's click on the graph. Once you click on the graph, notice these selected regions. If I drag this bottom right corner until I see the arrow signs going diagonally from top left to the bottom right, I'm going to click and hold the left mouse button and drag over such that we're highlighting February as well. And bam, you can see that we have an extra bar. For the Lamborghinis, has one bar that's a bit smaller, which is dark purple, and we have a taller bar, which is lighter purple. So we can see that this is January, and then this is February here. So we see that based off this graph, this is quite ideal for being able to compare the January and February sales for each particular car. So this is nice how we can see that we made an improvement in sales for this Lamborghini from January to February here. And the same goes for each and every single one of these cars here. Just to be aware of what happens when we click on this Chart Tools Design tab, Switch Row and Column. Notice what happens when we click on Switch Row Column. When we click it, you can see that rather than focusing on each individual car, let me just slide over here, it starts focusing on the actual month here. So instead of focusing on this these different rows, we're focusing on these different columns. So here's the pattern for January, and here's the pattern for February. So if this is not what we want, we can always switch back to the way it was before. So recall that we already practiced playing with labels, styles, effects, colors, as well as we made a pie graph with labels showing the percentage. We already played with all these things already, but one thing to emphasize that we haven't done so already is the size and position. When we click on a chart area, you can click and hold and drag it exactly where you want it to. You can even move the mouse over to any corner here until you see the nice double arrows, and you can even resize it. Now generally it's a bad idea to squish it, just much like any image editing program. When you click on a picture and you transform it and you just squish it, that looks kind of amateurish and ugly. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo that. And whenever you resize, it's generally a good idea to hold down the Shift button. When you hold Shift, you can actually resize it and constrain it in proportion. Everything stays the way it should be relatively. So the idea of moving it is very important. In fact, we can even resize this more accurately by right-clicking and choosing Format Chart Area, which brings up this box here. Or another way to do this is to simply double-click. Once you double-click the chart, you get the same thing, Format Chart Area. What we can do is we can click on this button here called Size and Properties. So with this button clicked on, you can be very precise with the way you want your size. So for example, if you want this to be exactly 4 inches, which is a double quote character as a height, and you want this to be 6 inches, which is a double quote character, by holding look for that double quote character on your keyboard and press enter, you can see that Excel automatically resizes this exactly the way that we want it. There's even a percentage here, you can see that. And of course you can even click on lock aspect ratio, so that when we freely transform the size of this by dragging a corner, it doesn't actually accidentally get squished. So what we have done in this car sales worksheet is that we've looked at a graph and clicked on it, and we manually adjusted the data range so that we're not only looking at January, but we're also looking at February. For this example, we saw the effect of switching row and column, and we also practiced moving pictures and positioning them and sizing them quite accurately, including the idea of sizing them with constrained proportions. So great job if you made it to the end of this video. If you keep persisting with these charts, you're going to be able to make some wonderful professional looking diagrams and perhaps even get a marketing job or something even better.